All right, welcome back to the PHLY Sixers podcast. I'm Derek Bodner, joined by Kyle Neubeck. How you doing, Kyle? How was your weekend?
You know, I think it's so funny that we basically only have one job to start the podcast, and it's seeing the queue, and I have to watch and see if Derek's going to make or miss the queue every time. So I feel like we always start the show with me roasting Derek in some capacity, and I semi-apologize for that, but, you know. Yeah, I'm doing well is the short answer, and I had a good weekend, all things considered. You know, it rained for most of 48 hours, so I didn't do a whole hell of a lot except think about whether Derek was going to tell our beautiful listeners to like and subscribe the show, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the audio feed. I'm sure Derek thought about that 0%, zero.
No, I specifically don't do it at the beginning just to kind of piss you off right now and just see if you're going to react to it every freaking time because you can drop it in at any other point in the 60 minutes that we're going to spend podcasting.
Yeah, you know.
But if you're not, please do. It helps us out.
Yeah, I like giving Derek a hard time, but we've been having some fun here. I see. Hey, listen, I was just talking about this before the show. We have Tafka saying, get a laptop stand. Tafka, I want you to think for 10 seconds here. What does the word laptop come from? Where does a laptop go?
I don't know why people care this much. I really don't understand.
It's crazy that people are upset.
I'm comfortable. The laptop's not going to slide off. It's not going anywhere. I can see
look,
it.
It's very secure. You know, my legs aren't moving a whole lot, but I'm glad people are concerned about how and where we place our computers.
Right.
Derek, what did you do with your weekend other than think about where to put your laptop?
I really didn't do much. I stayed inside. I talked to people. I saw some family on Sunday. I had a pretty chill weekend. It was certainly impacted by the fact that it rained every second of the entire weekend and still is right now. Fall got here real quick, but it was good. It was boring, uneventful.
I know you were holding on to your shorts until the last possible day.
No, not today. Yeah.
You could wear them, but I, for one, am kind of enjoying the nice brisk. I love that brisk fall weather. It's Monday Night Football tonight, as everyone can see. I got the Kelly Green on, so I'm ready for Monday Night Football, and I'm ready for some fall weather, even though Derek's upset.
Now he's yelling at us to tie our shoes. You can't see our feet. Come on now.
Gavin says Derek bought jeans this weekend. I would hope that he owned a pair of jeans prior to...
This is not the first time I've worn jeans on the podcast, by the way. I just happened to wear shorts on Friday.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so anyway, I believe really the only story in the NBA right now, certainly the only story that anyone is talking about, listening to, hearing about, is the Dame Lillard sweepstakes as they sit right now. And we already have a What's Up, Derek, Go Birds from Daniel in the chat. Obviously, Derek forgot his green attire for today. We'll have to get him a hat or a shirt or something from PHLY Locker that he doesn't have yet. We'll see.
Go. Actually, Daniel's an old friend. Go follow him on Instagram. He does some really cool, basically documenting a lot of graffiti artwork. He's got a really cool Instagram feed.
Dude, honestly, I'm always so impressed by graffiti artwork, not even because of the artwork, but because of where it is. And I look and I'm like, man, somebody stood up there and risked their life to get a tag somewhere. Anyway, so back to the Dame stuff. I know you and I were on the phone, sending texts, hearing things throughout the weekend. I guess from your what have you heard? Where do you think things sit right now? And I guess do you feel any differently than when we last talked on Friday afternoon?
Yeah. So I think the team that everyone's been talking about this weekend is Toronto Raptors, them getting in on the Dame mix. They have a couple different ways that could go to kind of construct a trade around there. But basically, could they be the team to go in and go all in on Dame, even against his own wishes? And I think certainly they could be. But there's also a part of me that thinks that this is a little bit of Portland just trying to get the market moving in a direction to get this resolved by camp, put a little bit pressure on Miami, and possibly, and this is something you were talking about earlier before the show as well, acknowledgement that the Tyler Hero trade market isn't really there, and that Portland Hero doesn't make any sense for Portland. They need to sort of flip him as to another team, and maybe that market isn't what they want it to be, so they're exploring other avenues. Even if, again, Lillard really is demanding to go to Miami. I do think Toronto is maybe a little more of a natural team to call that bluff.
Yeah.
than maybe Chicago was, in part because they have more tradable assets, but also in part because they are a little bit closer in terms of contending. I don't necessarily think they would be a contender with Dame. They would be close. Maybe if things broke right, they have a chance to win the Eastern Conference.
Certainly better than Portland is right now.
And better than Chicago would be even with
Yes.
Lillard. So I think they're a more natural team to use. The question is, would they actually have something that could, really make Portland make that gamble? And would they give, as much as they could to make that happen? If I had to handicap the field, I think Miami is still where he ends up. I don't know if that's above 50%, but I think that they represent the best odds. Even though, if I'm being honest, I'm kind of rooting for the field here. I wouldn't mind it if they got traded anywhere else, because on the one hand, I kind of like seeing Miami fans suffer a little bit. I'll be honest, I can be a little insufferable.
Dude, and not even just Miami fans. I think Miami media have been really goddamn annoying throughout this process, basically acting like this whole thing is a foregone conclusion. Pat Riley's going to get his way, and a little comeuppance wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
But two, a core of Jimmy Butler, Dame, and Bam would be really freaking good. And as good as Toronto would be, they wouldn't be as good as that core. So I think if you're looking at it from a Sixers perspective, I think him going to Toronto would be better. But like I said, I still probably would make Miami the favorite. I think a little bit is this, Portland trying to get the market moving in a direction where they can have this resolved by the time camp gets around, or at least close to it. So I would still make Miami the favorite. I'm not sure if they're above 50% threshold, but in terms of individual teams, I still feel like that's where it's at.
Yeah. So I'll tell you most of what I heard throughout this weekend as people are handicapping the race right now. The suggestion is out there that Toronto, if they really wanted to make a deal, could make a deal right now. And sort of what has been holding that up is Masai Ujiri, as Masai Ujiri does, is driving a hard bargain. I think the Raptors have made clear they don't want to move Scotty Barnes, but then that puts into focus somebody like a OG Anunoby, and Portland essentially saying, if you're not going to trade us OG, then we're not going to make a deal. And I think Masai is trying to drive a hard bargain on OG, as he has in previous talks where Dame Lillard was not available. And the confusing component of that to me is that I don't think Scotty makes sense as the guy to keep if you're trading for Dame. I think that's kind of you're making a mistake in the Warriors 2 timelines sort of deal, where Scotty makes more sense as a trade chip to get Dame, and then you have potentially Dame, Anunoby, Siakam, Pirtle, depending on everything that goes out in that sort of deal. Rather than, you bring in Dame, I don't really see what Scotty's utility is in an immediate contending team. I certainly think he's a guy with a lot of tools and interesting upside, but I have not understood that part of it. On the Miami end, you're sort of hearing the same teams get thrown out there as hero suitors as you were earlier in the process. I know Brooklyn is interested. I know San Antonio is interested in hero. But I think the problem for Miami right now, and Portland has made this abundantly clear, is that the picks they're offering are inherently not that valuable. They're going to be a very good team in the short to medium term if they get Dame. And Hero's market right now, teams are basically offering decent players and maybe a protected first, but they're not making it like, oh, this is the Godfather offer coming from the Heat. And the Portland Trailblazers have made it very clear they don't really want to deal with Miami. And so I say all that to say this. I do think the Sixers, if they were to make a real offer and say, we're going to put everything we can on the table here, I think they might not be the front runner. I think they have as good a chance as almost anybody if they really want to go and get Dame.
I think, and we have Randy in the chat asking, he thought that Dame was basically saying Miami or nothing. That hasn't changed. It's just there are some people who might be willing to gamble whether or not that is an actual ultimatum or just a preference. And I do think Toronto, because they've been sort of stuck in the middle there for so long, makes sense to be that team to gamble. So anything we're talking about here, it's not like Dame has changed his stance, certainly hasn't done so publicly. It's just teams willing to make that gamble. So I think, in terms of the Sixers, and again, I'm not convinced Daryl would trade Maxey. and certainly have not received any intel that he definitely would. I think there's a little bit of that problem there with, Maxey doesn't really make sense for Portland as well. They've got a lot of smaller on-ball creators who are questionable defensively and younger than Maxey even.
Yeah.
So you have to get a third team involved to sort of flip Maxey for other assets. And once you start doing that, it becomes, Tyler Hero is not exactly handling those rumors particularly well. I think it seems like it's affecting him. You don't want to start doing that with Maxey unless you know for sure that would get it done. And it would be real tough to negotiate that sort of like in private without it being leaked out. Because if you did actually put Maxey on the table, and again, we're hypothetical here, not saying that they have, Portland would be incentivized to leak that to then try to draw up even more pressure on other teams. So it would be a real tough rope for Morey to walk. But I do think, look, if you were going to flip Maxey to a third team, he would bring back more than Tyler Hero would, in part because he's just a year less into his career, a year away from that next contract. Maybe with the realities of the new CBA, maybe some team feels like they can get him on a cheaper deal. Maybe some team just believes in his on-ball creation a little bit more. He's, maybe defensively they think they can grow him more. He's just younger, not as far into his career, cheaper, and that brings with it some flexibility.
Yeah, and we have a comment from Part-Time Pope saying, Hero is a good player with a contract worth more than he is. Billy King special. I just want to make sure it's clear he said that and not me. I think that's part of the problem here, right? Is that, as you say, Maxey is earlier in his career.
4 years, 120, I think is what he has.
I believe that's around what's left. Yeah, you are better remembering all the numbers than I am.
Well, I said I believe it is. I actually looked it up. I know it is. I don't know why I hedge it like that.
It's the old when you were younger and you have to pretend you're not that smart because it makes you seem weird to people who don't have as good a memory. I get it there.
My entire career has been trying to pretend that I'm smart when I'm really just a moron with a microphone.
So and I think the other thing with Maxey is that certainly, not to say that Tyler Hero's character is bad, right? There's been nothing to suggest that he's not a hard worker or anything like that. I just think Maxey's overall package is so strong. The work ethic, the demeanor. He's the rare young player he's good enough to essentially win a game himself, but has been able to fit within this construct where he's with, big time star players and the league MVP, James Harden, a former MVP. And so I think a team looks at that and says, look, this guy he's not complaining about his role. He's doing whatever he has to do. He's still able to be on this constantly upward trajectory. And I think all those things are super appealing if you're trying to trade for him. Obviously, that doesn't seem like it would be Portland in that scenario. But yeah, I think there are myriad reasons why a team might prefer and offer more for Maxey than Tyler Hero, even if in some ways they're similar on paper.
Yeah. And again, I still think Miami's the favorite. I would probably put Toronto second. I haven't gotten a sense that the Sixers are necessarily all in or really exploring trading, making kind of package it would take to get Dame. Certainly, I'm sure they've had talks. Will continue to do so, whether that's primary or as a third team. I've gotten some pushback or some questions like, hey, could you flip DeAnthony Melton for a pick? Maybe get a pick for James Harden, have 3 picks for Dame, and I just don't think that's going to get it done. I think it would take Maxey, and I'm not ready to believe that the Sixers would do that yet.
Yeah, so there was... we're going to revisit a question right after this quick break that I want your feedback on. But first, we got to get to our good friends at DraftKings Sportsbook. Another week of football, everybody. I hope everyone had a good time relaxing, queuing in on Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce on Sunday since the Birds weren't playing. But, DraftKings Sportsbook, I know, is keeping you in on the NFL action. Great offers every single game day. New customers can bet $5, get $200 instantly in bonus bets. 5 down on any of this week's matchups to walk away an instant winner. And they're not stopping there. All DraftKings customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. Obviously, there's only one game that's left that all of us care about. Go Birds, all that good stuff. Football is more fun when you're in on the action, so download the app now. Sign up with code PHLY. New customers can bet just $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, with code PHLY. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccbg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, licensee partner Golden Nugget Lake Charles in Louisiana, 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Let me tell you a quick anecdote about that.
You know what I do with my DraftKings account right now?
Lose money.
Take the over on whoever's playing Denver.
The Denver Broncos.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So I was just about to say, building off of that disclaimer, I showed my wife a couple of comments we got, like, let's go ad time, baby, in the streams late last week. And I was like, I want you to listen to me read this disclaimer and see if you think I sound like a true ad reader here. And she bugged her eyes out and said, "Who are you?" after hearing it. So the people are saying that I sound like I actually am able to read ads now. What an achievement.
I'm proud of you, Kyle.
What an achievement. So, Brianna, if you can scroll up, we had a question from, I want to say it was from Zach, that it was, would either of you be willing to give up Maxey for Dame? Have to think it's not worth it. I know my answer. I think Derek's answer is probably the same, but I guess where do you stand on it?
So it's honestly really tough, which I think means it's close to realistic. But it's so, like, right now, what would you say the Sixers' chance of winning title is over the next 2 years? In either one of the 2 years, maybe like 5 to 10% max, and that's probably being a little generous. If that's increased to 20% chance over the next 2 years, is that enough? Because really, when you look at Dame, you're like, all right, you might have two. Let's say Embiid has 4 or 5 prime years left. That might be generous. You have to see how injuries happen.
Yeah.
Do you go all in to maximize 2 of those? Because I do think, in terms of winning a title in the next few years, your best chance out of the scenarios that we know about is with Dame. Like, I think of all of the people who you could get to compliment Embiid, realistically, in a short time frame, he is at the top of that list. But whenever we say that, like, even if you say, all right, that's as good of a pairing as you're going to find, even if you maybe say, like, all right, let's say in the Harden trade, you get a couple of good role players back that might fit alongside them, you're never close to a guarantee. You're never close to even a 50% chance to win a title.
Well, I was going to say,
always much more
you said
uncertain.
20%. Even that's is like,
high.
if you have a 20% chance to win
high.
the title, like, this is like Daryl Morey talk right here. If you went to Daryl Morey's office and you could prove that trading for Dame Lillard was a 20% title chance, he would make that trade the second he heard it. He'd say, done, sign on the dotted line.
But my point was to sort of overstate that, or at least go on the high end of a realistic spectrum, just to show even a good outcome is a lot of uncertainty. And when you're talking about giving up someone who has so much, road ahead of them, it's tough. I've always been very focused on trying to win a title during Embiid's window. I do think this is probably the best chance you're going to have to do so, but I would hesitate to do it. I'm not even saying I wouldn't, but I would certainly hesitate to do so, just because there's so many different ways that, that 80% could come up, or 85%, or whatever that number actually is. There's just so many things that have to go right, that if it was just a longer window, a 20% chance spread over a decade, great. That's not realistic. That's not how the NBA works. In fact, it's pretty much designed not to work like that. But the fact that you're talking about a 2-year window, it's tough. I would probably say no now, but I could probably be talked into it.
I would do it, and I don't even think I'd have to think that hard about it, is my thing. Because, so here's the calculus.
I think Dame's the best chance you got to win a title with Embiid.
Exactly. So here's the calculus to me. Right now, I'd give them very slim odds to even have a chance to contend, let alone actually win the title. And I think if you don't put together a contending type team in the next, let's call it 2 years, I think Joe is looking at the door.
Yeah.
And so to me, the calculus is less, can you compete over the long term with Maxey, or how good is Maxey? It's, if you're not going to be a real title team in the next 2 years, none of this matters. And if Maxey is the foundation that's here in 2 years, and it's whatever you get back for Joel in a trade at that point, you're not winning probably anything of consequence for quite a long time. And that's no disrespect to Maxey. It just kind of, the history of star trades suggests you're going to get sort of what the Blazers are expecting to get back right now, right? A bunch of maybes, and I don't think there's even a blue chip player on the table to trade for Dame Lillard, who's got a long, storied history of all-star, all-NBA, blue chip character guy, leader, and they're at the point where he's got 3 years left on the deal, and teams are like, yeah, we might trade you some okay stuff for it. So to me, I think you basically have to, if you have a real opportunity to bring an actual star in and put him next to Embiid, the future might be painful, but the future is going to be painful in one way or another regardless to me. And so I would do it. What I wouldn't do is leak that I'm making Maxey available. To me, the only way you make this deal is if you talk to Portland and say, we will do this deal today at this very minute, this very second, but the second you leak it, we're out. There's no upside for us here because of all the things we've talked about with contracts with Maxey and all the Rich Paul potential anchor. But I think you owe it to the organization and Joel to do whatever you can to try to contend right now.
Yeah, and logically, I think you're probably right. And if the trade happened, I would talk myself into it in a second. And I do think some people will say, all right, well, Maxey is going to be what Dame is going to become, what Dame is. And I don't think that's even close to a foregone conclusion. I think it would have to be an outlier level of development in terms of his passing specifically to reach the level that Dame has been at. I will say pretty comfortably that I think their best chance to win a title with Embiid is probably to make that trade.
Yeah.
And are you giving up a little bit of maybe post-Embiid prime Maxey career? Yes, but there's no guarantee that you are going to be able to contend with Maxey as a centerpiece anyway. And that doesn't mean that he wouldn't have value, but you would have it would be real tough to sort of find a complementary star to put alongside Maxey in a post-Embiid era because you've traded so many of your draft picks anyway. So maybe it makes sense to just double down, give up legitimately the last one you have to trade. The best chance to win a title the next few years is by making that trade. I agree with you.
Yeah. So, and look, it's always easy for people like us, people watching the show, reading our articles, etc., to be like, oh yeah, I'd make that trade. You don't have to, or I would offer this, I'd offer XYZ, because we don't have to deal with the human consequences of that stuff, right? I'm not in a room with Rich Paul having to explain why, oh yeah, we offered your client who we won't extend for the future for Dame Lillard, and now we weren't able to get him because the Raptors ended up trading for him or the Heat ended up trading for him. And I don't have to pick up the pieces there. I will report on the picking up of the pieces and all that, but that's why it's always so easy for me to sit here and be like, yeah, sure, I would do it because I don't have any real authority or responsibility when it comes to running the team. And so that's always something that I try to keep in mind. It's a much more difficult thing than I make it sound by saying, oh yeah, I'd pick up the phone and make the call tomorrow. It's that easy. Yeah.
And another thing to sort of keep in mind here is that if you did make that trade, your cap space plan for next year would be pretty much gone. You replace Maxey's cap hold with Dame's contract, you no longer have cap space to be a player in free agency. So that is one other aspect, I want to say hurting you in terms of building a contender around a Dame and Embiid core, because once you have that pairing in place, everything else just becomes a little bit easier. And the complementary pieces you need to add in. But it is a factor when you're talking about even the short-term upside.
So this is a comment from Hinky Process, says, trade Harden for a useful piece and picks. As long as you have Embiid, you are a contender. I don't know if I would go quite that far, but I do think that it's a fair point in the sense that we did see him in the regular season. Ben sits out, and it's him and Seth and younger Tyrese. They're still a very good team. They weren't a contending team. Right. That team was not going to win anything of consequence. But if you look at that situation and say, okay, Tyrese has leveled up since then. Joel, quite frankly, is a better player than he was 2 years ago. You could make the argument, hey, Nick Nurse is a better coach than Doc Rivers is. Well, whether that matters in terms of playoff ceiling and all that, I don't know. And maybe you just have more belief in the role players. I think that roster, role player-wise, was pretty good for that year. So I don't know that you could say that. But yeah, I think if you put a deep team around Joel, you make a deal with, say, the Clippers, and you get, I don't know, several really good role players, or even let's just say 2 good role players and picks. And you have Maxey and Joel. Tobias, as we said, can scale up, and you have a bunch of interesting guys on expiring deals. Then, yeah, you could bide your time and say, hey, maybe at the deadline, something or someone shakes loose that can turn us into a contender. I could buy that argument. But if you're saying, if you're the Sixers, we want to compete right now, Dame is really the only guy out there available who can change your fortunes in that way.
The way I would phrase that is, as long as you have Joel Embiid playing at, the current level that he's at, you are a break away from being a contender. Like, maybe that good fortune is Tyrese Maxey developing as an on-ball playmaker. Maybe that good fortune is you've got a pick in this year's draft hitting like you did with Tyrese Maxey, but you're one more good break away from being a contender. Will that happen in the timeline that Joel Embiid's still great? You're leaving a little bit up to chance and luck. You're always leaving something up to chance and luck, but the pathway is not certain for sure.
Yeah, and I 100% understand the idea from fans, and you've brought it up on the podcast as well, Derek. Some people just want to see Tyrese given this opportunity to try things and fail, and obviously you would hope he succeeds, but I think the organization is looking at it like this right now. If Harden is not there, or Harden is, kicking up a fuss and he's having his role diminish because he's hurting the team or whatever, I think there are a lot of people in the organization who are excited to let Tyrese go through growing pains, right? That they're going to put the ball in his hands. There's going to be some pain that comes with that. He would be the every play, every possession, every game point guard, floor general, getting them into their offense. And it's not something he's had to do on a full-time basis. I think that's a challenge that a lot of people would be excited for. Inside the organization, I would love to see it. I know a lot of people watching the show and listening would love to see it. And I 100% get that. If you just want to be bought in on this young guy who works really hard and might be able to ascend from very good young player to star and maybe long-term superstar, I always get that. I'm just saying, if you want to win, this is the trade to make.
I agree.
To me.
I agree. Yeah. I wish the roadway was just a tiny bit longer. That's all. I'm a little worried about Dame, 33, short guard. I'm a little worried that cliff might, it
always comes sooner than you expect with short guards, even with guys extending their careers now.
I think that's probably the only thing really holding him. If you could guarantee me that he has 2 more Dame level years, then I'd probably throw all caution to the wind.
Unfortunately, no guarantees in sports.
Like that. Nope.
Although I can tell you one guarantee, Derek. If you use the Game Time app to get tickets, you're going to get all kinds of benefits from it. So listen, I know the fall calendar, because the Eagles are great, the Phillies look like they're headed to the playoffs. Fall calendar for Philly sports fans can be jam-packed with events. Certainly Sixers games, if people are coming down off the high horse and less angry about them, you can buy some great tickets on the Game Time app. It's an awesome way to have a stress-free, last-minute, and frankly, affordable ticket buying experience, no matter when and where you're trying to buy tickets for. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. You don't have to plan months in advance. There are deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, theater, comedy, all kinds of stuff. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. You find tickets in the same section and row for less. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That is quite a good deal. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code PHLY for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code PHLY for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
So any other final thoughts on wrapping up Dame here, or should we go to the mailbag?
No, I think we can probably transition to the mailbag now, unless there's any stray questions we want to hit.
I have a feeling we might talk about that human being once or twice in the next week.
That'd be my guess as well.
All right, we'll start this one off. I feel like Francis Parker might have been,
Look at that. Look at this beautiful graphic.
There we go. He might
Other than our faces, which is, part of the graphic.
Well, I mean, look, we told the guy who designed it, I'm like, considering what you had to work with, I think my face, like, that's the Mona Lisa right there. Like, that's her crowning achievement. But I think they might have been pandering a little bit with this question, Francis Parker. But if Terquavion Smith continues to do well, what are the CBA and financial considerations that might affect whether the Sixers convert him to a regular contract during the season? I mean,
Mr. Math over there, this is your territory.
So the Sixers do still have their mid-level to use. You would assume that they would use the taxpayer mid-level because that wouldn't hard cap them like the non-taxpayer would. I've been told that they, are able, like Daryl Morey has been given the go-ahead to use that if he feels like he can. I've been told that they have the go-ahead to be above the luxury tax. Now, obviously that, a lot of that depends on how much impact is this always going to actually have, because billionaires like to save a couple million when they can. But I've been told that they have the leeway to do that if need be. But I think this would be the kind of thing where if this happened, it would be converted, after the trade deadline when everything's locked in. There's no more worrying about doing more moves or flexibility or hard cap, something like that. I would guess that he will play the majority of the season under a two-way contract. If he shows a lot, then that could be converted. Because at the end of the season, if he's converted, then he could be on the playoff roster, even if it comes after. It doesn't have to happen early in the season. So I would certainly expect that he will play the majority of the season, if not the entire year, under a two-way. And if he shows more than maybe you would expect, then you can convert him after the trade deadline and you have certainty.
And let me just say, I am a big supporter of any Turk questions and Turk topics.
I think it might have been a little bit pandering.
I was a big
on
booster on our preview show of the young guys, and anything that makes me look smarter, I'm always in support of that.
All right, this one from Dave. I'm just getting back into the Sixers news after a long summer break. What is a Rico Hines run? He says, Google tells me the Sixers have a new assistant coach named Rico Hines. They do. But Twitter talks about it like it's a practice facility in Camden. It is not. So he's a little bit confused. Kyle, why don't you fill him in?
Okay, so the kind of short version of this is there have been pickup games on UCLA's campus for long time. I mean, dating back to...
I think Magic
I was just saying, dating back to Magic Johnson's days with the Lakers.
Baron Davis ran it for a little bit.
Yeah, so these runs at UCLA have been, I would say, an essential piece of off-season NBA culture for decades. It's a place where now not away from the cameras because there's some filming involved, but it used to be away from the cameras. A lot of the big stars in the NBA, certainly a lot of the Lakers guys, but also UCLA players, incoming guys, established.
I mean, Rico Hines himself is a UCLA alum. I think he has lofty career averages of like 2 points per game.
Right.
But he did go there. That's a connection.
So it was a way for big-time NBA players to get run in the summertime, but also for UCLA guys to play against, that caliber of competition. It was just a breeding ground for work and development in LA throughout the summer. And Rico Hines, now assistant coach with the Sixers, former UCLA player, as Derek just alluded to, has essentially become the steward of these runs out in LA. Right. And so he runs all these things. To my understanding, it's 3 different courts. Yep. There's the winner's court in the middle, a second court to the side, and then the loser's court to the right, I believe, if you're staring at it from the middle. And you do not want to end up on that third court, obviously. And so lots of guys come in during the summer. I know James Harden has been out there in the past, Steph Curry. Joel Embiid did not play there this summer, but he was in attendance in LA while Paul Reed and Jaden Springer and Terquavion Smith and a lot of other guys were out there. And look, I think the best thing I can say about Rico and those runs is that if you watch some of the videos of him talking to these guys beforehand, this is not just a pickup game where these guys come in and do whatever they want. A lot of times there are certain constraints, like, hey, we're working on a floppy set today. And so every dead ball, these guys are running a floppy action, or every dead ball, they're running a middle pick and roll, or there's 10 seconds on the clock. And Dave McMenamin over at ESPN actually did a story about this the other day. And one of the funny anecdotes that I heard from it is that the shot clock is actually in Rico's head. And there will be times where it'll go for 40 seconds. And then he'll just start counting down from 5 and decide, you've wasted enough time, get a shot up or get the hell out of here. And so that's a long-winded way of saying they are famous pickup games out in LA that bring out a lot of stars, and it ends up being sort of an informal training camp coming out of vacation for a lot of these guys. So Rico is, I don't want to, legendary is a bit strong, but he's a big name, big name in NBA circles and very well respected.
And like you mentioned, Dave McMenamin just recently did something for ESPN sort of describing this whole thing, so go check that out if you're interested in more info. This one from Gluey Glue, good name. After seeing them on JJ Redick's podcast, do you agree with Iguodala that the Sixers should not have drafted Evan Turner and that the team at the time was not really trying to win? Now, I guess a little context to this, Andre Iguodala did say that he felt comfortable saying this because they had changed ownership and changed management. So he's talking about the Ed Snyder era Sixers,
Comcast
not
regime,
the Sam Hinkie era, where although they did end up talking about that a little bit later, and Evan Turner is not a fan of Sam Hinkie or the process that's been known for a while. But what Iguodala is talking about in terms of not trying to win is specifically about that Ed Snyder, Doug Collins era Sixers. I don't understand where he was coming from because they were trying to win. Probably a little too much. I wish they were trying less hard to win when they traded Allen Iverson, and maybe they could have tanked for Kevin Durant or Greg Oden. Now, that didn't work out, but Kevin Durant was in that draft too. No, instead they, Andre Miller and Joe Smith and won a meaningless amount of games. I think it's fair to say that Ed Snyder never really cared about the Sixers like he did the Flyers. That's obvious. It's well known. So he hired people and let them run, but they were trying to win. They were just largely incompetent. That's different. It's different.
I'll push back a little bit in the sense that I think it's almost a more insidious way of trying not to win. Like you're putting in the bare minimum effort versus what, Josh greenlit and Sam oversaw, which was we're not trying to win, but we're doing that with very clear goals in mind over the long term. I think what Andre was getting at with what he said about Ed Snyder's overseeing of the Sixers is that they didn't really care as long as they were making money, right? Like that's kind of what they viewed that's the implication I think is. I think
certainly Ed Snyder didn't want to bottom out because it would have hurt the bottom line. I think that's certainly fair, yeah. But I don't think Ed Stefanski, I'm sure he wanted to win. He just didn't have a coherent plan on how to do it.
Yeah. So I think the more important point is what they were getting at on that podcast with regards to was Evan Turner brought to the right situation for him, and they were pushing back that maybe Evan Turner on a different team where he's not having to battle with Drew Holiday for quote unquote point guard touches and he can play more like he did at Ohio State. And look, I think obviously Evan is going to be biased in that way, right? I don't think any of us, certainly not you and I.
No bust ever thinks they're a bust.
Right. I don't believe that if Evan Turner was allowed to be a full-time point guard somewhere that would have fundamentally changed his career trajectory. What I do think is important that they're getting at is that so many of these guys, outside of the top, let's call it 1 to 5% of NBA players, most guys' success is predicated on where they go, who they play with, who the coach is, and the role that they are put into. I think most guys are simply not going to be dropped into a team and succeed regardless of the context. And I think it's fair for Evan and guys like Andre, who was an incredible role player for a really long time. It's fair for them to bring up that you can't just drop players anywhere and expect them to be all-stars or franchise driving people. And Evan was certainly not going to be that. What I would push back on is sorry, dude. Doug Collins preferred Drew Holiday at point, and I think history. Right. I think history has shown that he was smart to do so. He was right to do so. Drew was clearly a better player. better point guard than Evan was. And the whole reason that Evan was billed as a quote-unquote point guard coming out of college is because he couldn't shoot well enough to be a secondary off-ball guy. And he wasn't athletic enough to make his money as, a driver and a constant creative force in that way. So I think there's truth within what they were talking about there, but I think it's being overstated as it always would be for a role player who feels like he didn't get a proper shot.
I think he spent a lot of time and I like Evan Turner. He frustrated me as a player because the Sixers had so much invested in him, but he's a funny guy. He's a good guy. Like, I don't have any ill will towards him.
Sure.
I think by not being a primary point guard for the first 4 years of his career, and he spent a lot of time in that podcast talking about buying into a role shortened his career and shortened maybe his earning potential, although he did pretty okay with a deal from Portland.
He actually shouted out Neil O'Shea on that podcast. That was hilarious.
Again, I think Evan Turner is really funny.
Yeah.
I think not being a point guard for the first 4 years, at least not being a primary point guard, extended his career and helped him get that monster contract because it didn't show what he wasn't capable of doing at an NBA level. There was still sort of like a mystique around him that, he can handle the ball, he can initiate.
He got to pass it off as Boo, Doug Collins.
I think that helped him down the line when if he had been thrust into a lead initiator role, people would just realize, he's not good enough to do that at this level. And the Sixers desperately wanted him to be. They drafted him thinking he would replace Iguodala. He didn't develop enough either as a off-ball secondary player or as a primary initiator to succeed. It's nothing to do with the Sixers or Doug Collins or trying to win. He just wasn't as good of an NBA player as he was in college. He was fantastic at Ohio State.
Yes, he was.
I had him ranked second overall. It was one of my bigger draft misses at the top of the draft. He just wasn't good enough.
Yeah. So it's a lot of ideas being conflated into one central thing, and I think that was the part that I did not like because, to your point, wasn't good enough to justify having the role that it seems that he would have wanted, right? Like, that's the argument here. He wanted to be a point guard, and he was not a point guard. You can't play point guard if you can't shoot. That's just not a thing you can do. I know I don't want to revisit the whole Ben Simmons argument again, but that's what it is.
Ben Simmons, who, by the way, was 10 times a passer Evan Turner was.
Well, 10 times the player that Turner was, certainly. Yeah. Anyway, we don't have to go down that road.
No, we don't. Wish him nothing but the best. I just think he's off base there. I understand his complaints about Sam Hinkie in the process. That part I actually got. But in terms of his career.
Yeah, look, I probably glossed over the human part of the process a little too much at the time. Like, these guys will just figure it out.
Brandon asking if Evan Turner was part of the Greg Oden team. No, that was Mike Conley.
Yes, that was a really good team. Honestly,
Evan Turner was after that.
Yeah, Greg Oden's performance in that championship game against Florida, given how good that Florida team was, I get why
he was going to be really good.
It's really a shame that we didn't get to see real Greg Oden.
And look, even if he didn't have the injury problems, he wouldn't have been as good as Kevin Durant, obviously. But like, people looking back on it now, it's real easy in hindsight. He was a blue chip prospect for sure.
Yeah, I believe, now this was 2007, so certainly there's no written evidence of my opinion at the time. I believe I was a Durant guy because, I was in high school and I'm just like, this dude is unbelievable watching Durant. Whereas Oden, it's like, I get it, but it's also, it's a big guy. So you never have the same, it's the Kyrie Irving thing, right? You never have the same love and passion for a defensively sound post player as like an all-world scorer who the aesthetics are just beautiful. So I was a KD guy, but almost accidentally was right on that one.
This one, which development guy has the most impact? Which veteran rental signing will have the most impact?
I mean, do I have to be the number one card carrier for the Terquavion Smith fan club? Because, I mean, like, who do we consider developmental?
Do you still consider Jaden Springer?
Yeah, I think, so I was going to say, is Paul Reed developmental?
He's established.
Yeah, he's an established role player. So essentially, we have to say it's Turk, Jaden, Ricky, Petrusev.
And again, if you're going to be, who are these names? I've never heard of these people. We talked about them pretty much in depth.
We do have a podcast for that, I promise you. And we'll probably get into them more during camp. Yeah, I mean, look, I think if I were a betting man, You might say Jaden just because he's been around longer, is on a real NBA contract, et cetera, and has the defensive profile. But I have to just plant my flag on Turk Island. I think that Turk, as a shot creator, shooter, the upside is significant enough that I have to bet on. That's my developmental guy, I guess.
I'd probably go Jaden. I just think you're right. I think he is the more likely of the two. Could he end up being less impactful? Could, but I would bet on Jaden just because I think he's probably a little more ready to make that step into a bigger role. And also because the defense is, I think, 100% playable right now. You just have to find a way for him to not completely, gum up your offense.
Gavin's accusing you of really liking Eric Snow?
No, I hated Eric Snow. He drove me nuts. So even back then, it was like, shoot. For the love of God, shoot.
I agree.
I was a big Aaron McKee fan.
I went back and watched that 0-1 finals, and I was higher on Eric Snow than...
He had a good finals. He was really good defense. Kobe always gave him props defensively. Yeah. Always. He was a very good defender. I've always just had a thing, like, you've got to be able to shoot, especially as a point guard. And Eric Snow very much could not.
By the way, Aaron McKee, it's a shame he was hurt during that finals because he was horrible, and that kind of sunk them.
They were really beat up in that. They were really beat up.
For sure.
He also asked, how long have you been writers? So the first draft I covered was I think the first one I was credentialed for was the Steph Curry draft, which was 2010? And I started covering the draft before I covered the Sixers. But the first NBA event I covered would have been 2009. So I'm old.
I guess for me, it depends on what you count as quote unquote covering or writing about there's published work of mine from probably 2013, I would say. But I was blogging and in college. Right. That was not, I'd say
full-time 2017?
Yeah, 2017's the first full-time year, 2017-18. But I had been writing about them, talking about them in some capacity for 4 years before that. Maybe time for a break change? Before we get back to the mailbag. Someone still got a responsibility over there, I think.
No, I agree. We could do that. That's fine. It's fine. We got to pay the bills. I get it. So this one is from Foco. Foco is a leading manufacturer of sports and entertainment merchandise with a product line that includes apparel, accessories, toys, collectibles, novelty items, and more. They're the best officially licensed gear for all sports and fandoms. And with it being football season, Kyle wearing a Eagles shirt, overalls, hoodies, hats, sunglasses, bags, everything you need for a game, Foco has it. And Foco has hooked PHLY up and provided awesome pieces for our sets. Foco always has our back for Philly sports, and they have yours too. Get the best gear around by using the link in our description. For all non-presale items, use a promo code PHLY for 10% off.
There you go. You didn't start laughing or get derailed by me being Vanna Neubeck.
You have done it pretty
here,
much every time. I should be getting used to
you're
it.
getting accustomed to it. See, that's why...
I'm getting accustomed to you being a moron, yes.
Oh, that's not nice. Well, while Derek calls me a moron, for everyone who's here, let me just remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give us a nice thumbs up.
I thought we were contractually obligated to do that at the very first sentence of the podcast.
We are, but it never hurts to do it coming out of an ad break either, my friend.
So the second part of that question, which veteran rental do you think will have the most impact?
So I guess it depends on if Danny can actually walk or run at this point, because I think Danny...
Never necessarily his strength to begin with.
I think Danny, just because of the fact that regardless of how the roster changes, because I think both of us would probably agree the roster is going to change at some point, right?
Yeah.
James coming back, James getting traded, a big-time deal being made. Danny will fit in essentially any configuration you can think of. He will have a role. He knows how to play it. He's been in the same role for 10 years, 14 years, 15, whatever it is at this point. And I can just see him. If he can still move, I think he will be useful. No, I think that's a pretty big if, given the injuries, his age. And so I would say if I were a betting man, Patrick Beverley.
Yeah.
Because I think, Bamba is in this category as well. He is on the younger side compared to Pat Bev, Danny, these other guys. But Bamba is more, he's going to need people to take nights off to play is sort of where I view it right now. So I think Pat Bev is more likely to play because of the contract, and I guess that'd be the expectation coming in. If Danny can rebound this year, and I mean rebound physically, not actually go out and rebound. It would help if he would rebound. It would definitely help if he can rebound. I think if Danny bounces back, I can just see him not being the same thing he was here a few years back, but an every night, like pencil him in for 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. I agree. I think Patrick Beverley probably has the clearest role.
Yeah.
So because of that, I will say that he will have the biggest impact. I think there is a case to be made for Kelly Oubre, just because they're so desperately in need of a wing with athleticism.
I almost forgot that he was on the team for a second.
Will that be a good impact? I'm not entirely sure, but he didn't specify that. He just said biggest impact. So there's a chance he could end up getting more minutes. But I will probably say Patrick Beverley because I think there's a better chance he maintains his role even if he is not the player he was, being safe.
I'm going to agree with you.
They're just so desperately in need of point guard, of anyone to handle the ball.
Yes, I will amend that to say I think it's Oubre, but I think that we're saying if it's raw impact and you don't care about one direction or another, I think he's the guy. I think Pat Bev would be my hope for a positive impact. Man, Danny is getting flamed. We have from Randy, Danny's going to move like he's wearing shoes 4 sizes too big. We have a comment from Tafka saying Danny has my pop-pops hips. So, yeah, honestly, the biggest hurdle for Danny is he's got to make the roster out of camp.
That reminds me. Tafka reminds me. Do you remember Michael Levin's original name on Liberty Ballers?
I do not.
Tafka MB for Michael Bourne. The artist formerly known as Michael Bourne.
That's a real deep cut for our...
Old cut. This one from Many Faces. The Many-Faced God. Nice reference. Does Nick Nurse sign with the Sixers if he knew the shit show he was stepping into? His words, not mine. With the Harden situation and overall weaker roster that's been constructed. I think there are 2 reasons I would say yes. 1, money. Always helps. 2, Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
Always helps. I think he probably... and there's been a lot of reporting that Giannis didn't prefer him.
Yeah.
So with that off the table, then I think this was still probably the second best option he had. I think this was a good situation for him.
Yeah, look, I keep trying to stress this, but looking at it from a coach's perspective, there are not many times you're going to lose your job on a team that was, let's be frank, was very mediocre in Toronto.
Right.
And then jump to a team that has the reigning league MVP. That doesn't happen often. So Nurse signing here, I know that he had other options, and as Derek alluded to, I think there was some pushback from stars in other markets.
And I guess a better way to phrase that is probably that Giannis preferred Adrian Griffin, not that he had anything necessarily against Nick Nurse. Yeah.
But I think Nick Nurse looked at this opportunity and said, look, if I can, I'm going to get the guy who has tortured my team for years now. They've had problems with Joel and the Sixers post 2019, right? If I can get my hands on this guy that has a clear track record of improving essentially every single year, right? I think it's fair to say, even if it's smaller jumps year to year, Joel gets better every single year. I know he's in his late 20s. Nick Nurse looks at that and says, this is a guy who cares. He's at the top of the individual heap when it comes to winning that MVP award. But he wants it enough that every year he gets back in the lab and says, I'm going to add this. I'm going to do that. If you give me that as Nick Nurse, as the foundation of what I'm building here, I can figure it out. I can make Tyrese Maxey better by running this set or that set. Another guy in Tyrese who brilliant reputation around the league. Nick Nurse looks at that guy, has killed his team a couple times, single-handedly won the Sixers a game in Toronto last season. He's fired up about this opportunity. I know it's not, look, he's not coming in here thinking we're the favorite to win the title, right? But I do think part of that is they're going to go to Colorado and they want to stare down the Nuggets in the preseason from day one and set that expectation that we've got work to do. We have to catch up with these teams who are ahead of us right now. And I think Nick Nurse has, say, the ego to say, we can get there. I believe I can push this team to get there. I think just like a Joel Embiid has to be wired in a way to say,
Yeah.
I'm the best fucking player on the planet, Nick Nurse has to believe I'm the best coach on the planet and I'm going to take these guys to the next level. I don't think he has any regrets that I could think of.
No. And I mean, look, a coach coming into a situation like this isn't going to have the kind of baggage that we have had watching them hit the second round year after year after year. He's going to look at it as a team that has the MVP, that was 2 DeAnthony Melton threes away from beating the Celtics in Game 6, and that has a chance, if things break right, and if he can add to what they already do, to meaningfully compete. And I understand that that's why that is a perspective he should have. That's a perspective you want him to have, even if the Harden situation isn't what he expected when he signed up. It's not like the Sixers are all of a sudden completely irrelevant.
No.
And when you're coach, you're not, almost by definition, you're not going to a perfect spot. It's just he wants to compete. And outside of Milwaukee, he probably wasn't, I guess Phoenix. This was a really weird summer in that regard, where there were a couple competitors looking for coaches. This is still a good spot for a coach. It's like as much as we are, like I said, beaten down by the second round exits, you have to have a different perspective, and he's right to do so.
It's a very good spot. I know everyone's on edge and angry, and I feel that. I talk to you guys all the time. I have personally witnessed in person most of these excruciating losses over the last 6 years or so.
They haven't been any nicer in person.
Yeah, it's not any better being around all the people who came to the games and are distraught and they file out, like shoulders slumped and all that. And all my friends and family are in depression mode in May, which I thought we all get that out of our systems when it's cold out in December and January. I get it. I know that people are sad, angry, frustrated, whatever word you want to use to describe it. But I don't think Nick Nurse is carrying that baggage in here. I think Nick Nurse is excited to work with the reigning MVP and Tyrese Maxey. And there are all these other, even the role players. Like, there are a lot of role players who've been in the gym all summer trying to get better, to try to push them forward. And I think that's what Nick Nurse sees. Nick Nurse is not seeing, Derek and I talking to you guys about how depressed they are and why they need to trade everybody.
Denver's not hiring a coach. You're not going to walk into that situation.
Yeah.
All right. Last one here from Bob, and then we'll close up the show. How important is it to Morey that Harden gets traded to where he wants to go? Like, if the best offer is Toronto, would he send him there?
I 100% think he would send him anywhere.
Here's the bigger issue, I think. It's not what Daryl Morey would do. It's if you're Toronto, you might be willing to make a gamble on Dame because of the upside, and also because I think a lot of people just don't believe that Dame's going to get to a team that at least has a chance to compete and say, no, screw it, I'm not reporting. I think a lot of people will question that. Harden's a little more volatile. I don't think people necessarily can predict or take that chance like they would with Dame. So I think it will impact Harden's market perhaps more than it does Dame's. But I think Daryl will trade him to wherever gives him the best package. Yeah,
this is a question that's more predicated on what the GM of any other team would think, right? I think Daryl is looking at it as, I'm holding on to James because I'm not getting the value the Sixers need to get back to be a great team or contending team, however you want to frame that. The problem is if Toronto was thrown out as an example there, if you trade him to Toronto or want to trade him to Toronto and Masai is like, well, I don't believe James is going to suit up for us or be happy and I'm not going to give you anything, well, then you're not making the trade. So that's what it all comes down to. I do appreciate there was a Gavin called Derek and I the symbols of hope for the whole city, actually, for Philadelphia, and that is... It's definitely not right. When you have the Phillies and the Eagles playing... If I'm the symbol of hope for the city, you guys are screwed. So I hope there's... I don't know, Gritty certainly isn't at this point. Maybe Jalen Hurts or somebody with the Eagles. Obviously, go Birds with the sweatshirt right now. But I do think Jalen Hurts has more impact on Philadelphia sports than you and I. Yeah, I think that kind of goes without saying. But look, I'm not going to lie. Like, the path towards winning a title with this team is very cloudy and murky. I'm just not ready to be completely fatalistic when you have Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and Nick Nurse.
And they've burned so many assets and so many potential pathways to being not only a contender, but a freaking dynasty, that it's depressing and it's frustrating and it's all of that. I'm just not ready to completely bury this area yet. I'm just not ready.
And Ed in the comments says Maxey only developed because Ben Simmons refused to play.
He would have developed anyway.
I think that's an overstatement, but I do think that that's something, that general idea is something to keep in mind, right? Right now, everyone's like, damn, Harden's a malcontent. They're going to trade him for role players and picks and whatever it is. But what does it mean for these guys that all of a sudden are thrust into bigger opportunities? What does Maxey get to do now that he wouldn't have had a chance to do otherwise? And maybe that does look ugly in the short term. Maybe in the long term, it still is bad. But we don't know. There's no way of ever... I go into a season, I make my predictions. Half of them are wrong within, a month of the season starting.
And by the way, we'll have some predictions before the season starts.
Yes, we will.
Come in and see our wrong predictions.
But
screenshot it so you hold us accountable.
The whole fun of doing this and podcasting and writing and reporting and all this, the reason I don't write about like reality TV or video games or something is that every single day we wake up and I don't know what's going to happen. I show up at the arena and Joel Embiid might score 59 points against the Utah Jazz, or Joel Embiid might put Aaron Baines through the core of the earth with a dunk in a playoff game, or the Sixers will lose in Toronto, PTSD, trigger warning, because Kawhi's shot bounces 4 times, and I hear Derek make the loudest noise I've ever heard him make in my life because he's sitting right next to me. That's why I get up and do this every day, because you really can't know. Nobody knew the Nuggets were going to win the title last year, right? A lot of Nuggets fans were convinced they're going to be healthy. They're the team to beat as long as they're healthy. And then they had a crisis of confidence in March because Denver stopped caring and they went off of a cliff, and it was like, oh, the fraud Nuggets are back. Now all of a sudden it's like, oh, it was a foregone conclusion that the Nuggets were winning the title. No, of course not. Yep. It's a journey that these guys go on from October until June, whoever wins the title. And that's what makes this fun. And so as much as we're going to unload the baggage, or I'm unloading the baggage, I absolutely torched Joel and James and Doc and all these guys to end last year. The second training camp opens, it's a new year, and we see what happens. And that's how I go about this. And that's how Nick and Joel and Tyrese and all these guys will go about this.
Well said. I think that's how we should end the podcast.
So if I'm the symbol of hope, I hope that did something for maybe like 3 of you guys out there. But I want us to have fun. And so that's just my overarching message here.
Nope. I got no notes. Thank you, Kyle, for jumping on, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and obviously stay tuned for all our other wonderful shows coming at you later today.
Boop.